I'm Chris Alderman, and this is SEO in 2024 Additional Insights.
Chris, what's your additional insight for SEO in 2024?
My additional insight is to focus on outcomes, not outputs. While best practices are great, I feel the industry has become particularly obsessed with making sure that every page on a website is containing every single best practice without a real consideration to exactly what each page is trying to achieve and where the opportunity is. My feeling is both on the client side and on the agency side, we really need to consider what is best for the customer and how we're going to reach new customers with any product or service that we're putting forward.
Superb. Okay, let's define the meaning of outcomes in this particular context. So what do you mean in practice by focusing on outcomes rather than outputs?
So it's going to vary between exactly what product or service you're putting forward. But if we were to take an e-commerce site, the real objective of an e-commerce site is to reach new customers, grow sales, and get more products in front of the consumer, rather than an output, which might be something like your page speed insight score or your core web vital score. These things are outputs, or the number of developer tickets that you're putting forward, the number of best practices that you've met. These things are really a means to an end. And actually, the industry as a whole has lost sight of actually what we're trying to achieve in SEO, which is to help grow our clients or help grow our businesses through organic search as a channel.
So are there any particular KPIs that you tend to prefer when focusing on outcomes?
Yeah, so it's a relatively controversial metric, but I still stand by both reach and visibility as core metrics within SEO. Naturally, there's a lot of external influence that happens within search as a market. There's seasonality, there's brand demand, there's all of these other factors that come through. But actually being able to define exactly what your customers are searching, targeting down to those keywords, and then capturing a percentage of that traffic will help be able to determine whether or not over time you're capturing more of the demand against those search terms as your rankings improve, weighted by search volume, weighted by position, and then moving towards that target over time. Actually combining that with demand metrics to see actually, is the product that you considered a priority last year still the same priority this year? And being able to scale that up across, potentially thousands of products or thousands of search terms, and then layering that against overall traffic and revenue targets, rather than focusing purely on pure play SEO rankings.
So what are the metrics behind visibility nowadays? Because my day it was about an assumed click-through rate based upon your position in the SERP, but obviously positions probably alter more rapidly nowadays, and you've got things like local packs pushing down the organic SERP as well. So how do you define visibility?
So I think there's a number of different ways you can go. I think it's absolutely changed over the past 10 years from what we've seen with the traditional 10 blue rankings and just having an assumed click-through rate in position 1, 2, 3, and 4. And it's really moved to actually how much visual content do you have on the search results, including things like knowledge graphs, local packs, and this is potentially going to grow significantly as we start to see search results considerably change with the introduction of potentially search generative experiences, as well as just, numerous things that Google are adding into the search results outside of SGE with product grids, et cetera, and actually being able to use the new tooling that's available on the market to see how much of the pixel width that you own within a search result and overlaying that against what you're seeing with click-through rates in Search Console itself, and being able to kind of derive a meaningful visibility metric to see how visible or how much percentage you capture on the search result itself, weighted by obviously above and below the fold.
So are clients nowadays fairly comfortable with brand visibility as a satisfactory SEO metric and an outcome that you're achieving, or ideally are they still looking for traffic?
Most clients are still looking for traffic and revenue for the type of brands that have brand recognition. So obviously, if you're working with a small site or a small brand that doesn't have a lot of brand propensity in the market, then pretty much everything you do within SEO is going to be considered incremental growth. Because if you're starting from a point of 0 and you grow it to a point of 1,000, for example, all of that is incremental. But for an established brand, actually being able to say, okay, here is the difference of the traffic you would have got anyway through your brand searches and through your existing SEO remit, and how much you've grown on top of that, I think is really, really key. And to be honest, the thing that a lot of enterprise clients struggle to define internally. So anything agencies can do to help really, really concisely say, here is the difference between what your investment in SEO has made versus what you would have achieved without that investment. And that really comes down to being able to say, we focused on these terms in these ways and we grew visibility this amount, and therefore having some summarization of exactly how much that relates to traffic and revenue in context of their overall marketing effort.
Got you. Okay, so for each client, ideally, you're looking to define a financial value of the traffic that you're driving.
Exactly.
And what does this mean? This focusing on outcomes mean for honing of strategy over a continual basis? How do the metrics influence what you do on a practical daily basis?
So one of the things when I took over the team at Brave Bison was really to focus on not being an agency that talks about those outputs. So rather than us go into a quarterly business review and say, we've authored 30 pieces of content, we've resolved 25 developer tickets relating to SEO, and we've, built 45 links, for example, which is the way the industry has historically worked a lot of the time. But really to say, how much additional traffic did those 30 pieces of content drive? And out of those 30 pieces of content, which are the ones that are responsible for the bulk of that traffic? And then really nailing that down to develop your strategy over time. So it might be the case that you threw 30 pieces of content out into the wild and actually 5 of them did really well and 25 of them didn't. Going back, analyzing the 5 that did well and understanding why that is. Is it because they targeted terms that the industry hadn't worked out yet and therefore are less competitive and we've been able to pick them up easily? Or actually, do we just have a stronger authority in what those 5 pieces of content related to that we can either then double down, or we consider what should we be doing back on those 25 pieces of content that didn't perform so that we can then boost that up? And again, that goes across everything from content itself to your offsite strategy, to your technical strategy, whether or not you should be opening, closing facets, all of these kind of different elements of SEO, really thinking about what's working and what's not working, rather than just exactly what we did in line with Google's best practice.
So how do you prioritize what has to be done based upon these outputs, these metrics that you're looking at? Because obviously there's a myriad of possibilities that an SEO could undertake in order to make a website more successful. You could be looking at on-site, outreaches you talked about, improving content, different technical health aspects. How do you prioritize things like that?
So the best way, in my opinion, to do this is to iterate your strategy over time. Firstly, breaking down exactly what the optimization relates to. We know that some products or some pieces of content or services are going to be bigger in overall search volume than others. That can be defined through keyword research. You're also able to balance that against things like conversion rate within analytics and average order value to kind of see the overall, or get an estimate of the overall value that it relates to from just a pure service line level. But then actually when it comes down to the specific work streams, what I like to do is use an OKR framework, which is an objective key result framework, which is popular. It's kind of slower to reach SEO as a community, but within tech and development communities, it's been widely adopted. And actually saying our North Star goal is to grow X amount within these products or services, and then breaking the key results down. If we're saying, for example, one key result against technical, one key result against content, one key result against offsite, for example, just on a really, really basic layer, actually saying how much across the quarter we've moved on those key results to those, and actually what we think the biggest impact is. Then on a 3-month basis, re-review that, see exactly what's working, what's not working, and then iterate that strategy over time so that we're constantly updating. If we're seeing in one area of the site, we've built a lot of links, but we haven't then, for example, seen any movement towards our overall North Star objective or those ranking goals, then actually there's a fair summation to say that that's not the best thing that we should be doing. In other areas, if we're seeing technical optimization has actually had a very, very immediate impact, then we should potentially double down on that. That's obviously going to reach a point of conclusion and we'll have to look at new work streams, but just constantly evaluating your strategy and seeing exactly what we see when we implemented something, when something went live, what the influence it was on rankings, and really just kind of getting in detail with the data so that we can really make sure that we're putting forward our best foot at any given point in time. There's obviously a test and learn against that, but that is really the only way that we can move forward as an industry, is to constantly look at the data and make hypotheses, test those hypotheses, and then double down against it.
You talk about having a 3-month review. Is that when you'll actually review whether or not you should shift this North Star that you're talking about there? And also, do you tend to have a larger, more comprehensive review on an annual basis?
So typically, the North Star will be reviewed on an annual basis, but we will review the work streams that bring us to that North Star on a quarterly basis. So again, understanding that if we've briefed in at the start of the year, hypothetically 150 pieces of content, actually, if we're getting into the first 3 months, we've done 25% of those, but actually that's not actually performing against our overall North Star objective, we're not moving closer to it, then actually spending the next 9 months continuing to author content potentially isn't the right idea, because we're going to get to the end of the year and we're not going to see the results that we're aiming to see. And we should actually look at, what can we do to make that content move closer? Are we actually looking at the wrong strategy here? Are we potentially targeting the wrong terms? Do we not have the right propensity to rank? It's really when we get into the detail of the work streams itself. Ultimately, the North Star goal will change with the industry and the search landscape, but it's better to review that, in my opinion, on an annual basis.
So it used to be that SEO could sit fairly silo in their own world, but talking about outputs, that obviously is also impacted by other marketing functions. So how do you find that it's changing, that the SEOs need to work more effectively with other marketing functions?
Yeah, one of the biggest things here is just even understanding exactly what a bidding strategy, for example, within paid search, paid media is having on overall goals, but also understanding that there's external above the line activity that are going to drive searches and therefore lift up your SEO traffic, which kind of goes back to my point around what is actually the incremental value of SEO on the investment that's being made. If you're working with a big enterprise client and they release a series of TV ads where at the end of the TV ad, it says, Google X, Y, and Z, and you suddenly see a big uplift, it's probably as a result of the TV ads and not as a result of anything that we've done within SEO. But there are some very, very immediate things that SEOs should be aware of if they're not currently speaking to their paid media team. For example, what we've seen over the past sort of 3-4 years is a lot of clients have gone on pause with their paid search activity, and then naturally organic is picking up a certain amount of that because the paid search ads are no longer there. Just being aware of when those pauses are happening and exactly being able to quantify what the paid search traffic was and how much that's then influencing on organic, I think is incredibly important. And being able to put that in your reporting to help keep your SEO team transparent and honest about how much value it's actually bringing in.
Got you, okay. And what's your opinion of the value of paid search bidding on brand, and when it's appropriate not to bid on brand and hopefully to get that traffic for free using SEO?
So, back in the day when it was much easier to control at a keyword level within paid search, you could build your own models around exactly what terms you were bidding on. I think as we've seen paid search become more sophisticated with Performance Max, and even before that with things like auction time bidding, actually the value of just bidding on your brand in order to feed the AI model enough data, enough conversion data for it to then make sense within the generic space, I think there's a lot of value behind that. And actually that is something that should be considered. If you're looking at your paid search strategy and you're saying, 90-95% of your budget is spent on your brand campaigns, potentially considering switch off tests within a more traditional bidding strategy is completely viable. And then integrating with your SEO team to see what the value of that is. Again, that's continuously getting harder as Google continue to introduce more sophisticated AI models that are predicated on having good quality conversion data. But it's really situational, I think, depending on the site that you're working with and the client that you're working with, right?
I think that's the fanciest way of saying it depends I've ever heard. Well, you've shared what SEO should be doing in 2024, so now let's talk about what SEO shouldn't be doing. So what's something that's seductive in terms of time, but ultimately counterproductive? What's something that SEO shouldn't be doing in 2024?
So it might be slightly controversial, but I really feel the SEO industry has been focused quite a lot on page speed since essentially Google released it as an algorithm, or Google announced it as an algorithm ranking factor. One of the reasons it's so seductive is because it's one of the few elements of SEO where you can tangibly say, our site was loading on average in 5 seconds at this point. We made some optimizations and it's now loading in sub 3 seconds at this point. The reality is doing that is a very, very easy way to communicate that you have done something within SEO, but actually without then considering, okay, what are we going in? What is the customer going into on that slightly faster page? Have you looked at the content? Have you looked at the onward journey? And it's kind of breaking out of those silos of this is a really, really easy thing for us as an agency or as just as an SEO team to communicate to our board, to our clients, to say something has been done without that wider context, I think is really, really one of the pitfalls in the industry right now. And it's difficult to break out of that mindset because you want to have really, really tangible KPIs, but actually there's so many influences on SEO organic performance at the moment that you need to really be looking at everything in context rather than just sort of individual metrics in isolation.
And in terms of drilling down into that customer experience, do you look at video recordings? Do you perhaps even try and have focus groups and have face-to-face conversations with customers? Or is looking at metrics inside Search Console or other platforms sufficient?
Absolutely. I think pulling in customer data is incredibly important. I think it needs to be scalable enough. And I think there's obviously positives and negatives of every route. The positives of looking at KPIs is you can scale it up to your entire, essentially, user base. The problem with focus groups is that you then fall down to, it's always slightly a little bit off track of what the actual consumer is doing out in the wild. I think a mixture of both, combining that with some of the things that SEO tend to touch less, like actual on-site experience data, and also just looking at that cross-channel as well, is incredibly important.
Chris Alderman is Head of SEO and DPR at Brave Bison, and you can find him over at bravebison.com. Chris, thanks so much for adding your additional insight to SEO in 2024.
Thank you very much.
I've been your host, David Bain. You've been listening to an episode of SEO in 2024 Additional Insights, a Majestic series that complements the original SEO in 2024 podcast, video series, and book. Find out more at SEOin2024.com.